Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join me this afternoon. It's nice to see some familiar names in the list of participants and to have you take the time to learn with me today. Today, we're talking about the cost of fear, how psychological safety impacts recruitment and retention. So, this is a very quick conversation. 30 minutes is, of course, not enough time to get all of the information across surrounding psychological safety, but this is an opportunity for you to address some of the components of psychological safety and how these play a role in the costs that we may be spending within our organizations. There's a lot of times that we have costs that we may not connect to psychological safety. And so when we're looking at addressing our finances, especially going into the new year, our organization may be looking at resources or logistics surrounding time off or the amount of people on shifts or the costs associated with sick days or health benefits and all of those things that we may not connect to the way that people are treated or interact within the workplace. So today we're going to walk through a couple of those pieces. We're going to talk about what psychological safety is, allowing everyone the opportunity to reflect on that definition and see how it's integrated within the workplace. We're going to look at some tangible impacts, the ripple effect of psychological safety, and how you really start to address these components within your workplace. So, to get started, let's talk about what psychological safety is. So, psychological safety is someone's ability to be seen, heard, and valued within an organization. This is the counterpart to physical safety. Often, when we think about physical safety, we address the way that people are interacting with each other and with the tools of their job to see if they are going to maintain a certain standard. When it comes to psychological safety, we don't always have conversations about how people interact or how they interact with their workplace to support this. We may include various policies or procedures within an organization that address psychological safety, but not at an overarching level. So, if you have a discrimination and harassment policy, you may be looking at psychological safety from one component, or if you have a code of conduct or a guideline of how people interact, communication standards, those may respond to psychological safety, but there's not something that's overarching like workplace health and safety, which we do regularly and have those conversations a lot in our workplace. Now, what's important about this is when we talk about psychological safety compared to physical safety, we may not draw attention to the importance of it. So now, more often than not, we see the impacts of psychological safety and we're reactive to it, but we need to start being more proactive and considering how we can build out programs and opportunities for people to develop it. WSIB and other insurance organizations, as well as unions, are giving more attention to psychological safety as a key component of the workplace. Just like you'd wear PPE, people also require spaces that allow them to be psychologically safe. So when someone is psychologically safe, they're able to take risks, speak up, and share ideas. I like to remind people that when people don't share information or critique, it's not because an organization is perfect. It's because they may not feel safe or have that trust and that relationship with people to share their feelings or their true insights. So they're able to take risks knowing that if they make a mistake, they'll have that support. And calculated risks, of course, are important there. People are able to speak up and critique people who are in positions of power, whether it's their supervisor or the way that an organization is run. And then they're able to share ideas and say, hey, did you know that this might work? Or we could try it this way instead. Or I've done this for a long time and I've learned that this works better than the way that we're doing it. Or perhaps when we train and bring in new people, we could inform them this way. So when you have that psychological safety, you know that you're going to be seen, heard, and valued, meaning that you as an individual is important in contributing to the development of an organization. That builds the autonomy of an individual, and they start to get that skin in the game or that investment in an organization's growth and development and innovation. If they don't have the psychological safety, then they're going to come in, do their job, or as expected, maybe not go above and beyond and contribute to that long term success of an organization. The fear with creating psychological safety could be, well, if we create this wonderful place and we develop these people, they're going to leave. And that's what you want to do. You want to create people who can leave your organization but don't want to. So, some factors that contribute to psychological safety or a lack of it could be the lack of trust. So, like I said, if they're not communicating, then they might have a lack of trust. There's a blame culture. So, people who make mistakes are kind of hounded for those mistakes, or they're targeted for when mistakes are made. Even though, when we look at the way mistakes are made in an organization, we know there's a lot of stakeholders that play a role. And so, if one person or one department or one group continually gets blamed or takes the fall, that can contribute to a lack of psychological safety. As well, we have micromanagement. So we want to create leaders. Don't want to create followers. When you're in a position of power or you're contributing to the development of an organization, you want people to feel that ability to have their own skills, their own roles and responsibilities, and they're not just doing the work because they're being watched to do it, or they have to do step by step and make sure that they're following the way that that is expected. So they can be more creative, they can be involved in decision making and in problem solving and that innovation piece without being concerned that they're being micromanaged, because that takes away from that ability to have self-worth and respect for the self, or understand that the self can do more and be better if someone's always questioning their skill or their ability. What happens when we don't have psychological safety in the workplace is you're seeing higher turnover, because people are going to find spaces that they're willing to invest in where they feel the culture is stronger. Traditionally, when we looked at the career paths, if we look at the generations' career paths, baby boomers were in career loyal positions. They would join organizations and they would stay with those organizations through their entire career, through the good, through the bad, and they would kind of just take it because that was the expectation that once they got into a position, they were working through that for their whole life. Now we take on stepping stone careers. And so you look at Gen Z and you're looking into Gen Alpha, who will be that next generation in the workplace, and they have more demand on the way that they're treated as individuals versus the way that they are perceived by the world. So they're not going to stay at an organization because they don't want to have a laundry list of places on their resume. They're going to leave because they have that self-respect and they have that, what a lot of people call entitlement. They have that respect for themselves to find somewhere that treats them well so they can create a well-rounded life versus having a position that may cause them that harm long term. You're also going to see reduced engagement. So when people pull away from an organization, it may not be because they're not interested or not committed to the job. It may be because the organization is pushing them out. So when people are trying to contribute or trying to participate, and time again, their ideas have not been heard, have not been implemented, have not been put into action, then they're going to stop giving ideas. It's like when you invite someone out for dinner or to a party 10 times. Well, the 11th time, you might not invite them. And so the same thing could be if you have an individual who's contributing and they're not being engaged the way that they could be. When you talk about the third one, when we're talking about increased strength or increased stress, we have a lot going on. Everyone has a lot going on all the time. We have our personal commitments, we have our professional commitments, you may have families, you have hobbies, you have the world to kind of take into consideration as well. And we're in a unique place where we haven't taken the time to debrief the pandemic. We haven't taken time to discuss pushing back into our normal that people are saying, like, let's just jump back in. And so we have an increased Rolodex of things to do in our day-to-day life. We've integrated technology where we're doing more. And so what used to be 3 meetings in a day with some conversation in between has become 10 meetings in a day or 10 tasks online. You're doing school at the same time as you're doing a full-time job and you're trying to coach and all of these other things. When you have increased stress, and then you have all of the increased stress at work where you're not being understood, you're not being valued and validated as a person, can be very challenging to feel like you want to contribute. So, overall, when we're talking about psychological safety, we're looking at how people are understood as human beings and how that is recognized and represented in the workplace. So, what does that mean for your organization? What does that mean for the way that you interact with other people? Well, there's three main ways that we can look at the tangible impacts of psychological safety. So we can look at recruitment, retention, and the financial impact. And these all intertwine together. So there's not one thing will happen versus the other. They're all going to change at their own pace, but they're all going to be intertwined. So primarily when we look at recruitment and retention together, we are seeing what level of toxicity within a workplace is pushing people out. We can talk about terms like imposter syndrome. If someone feels like they don't belong somewhere, you can reframe it to consider, is it that they don't belong, or is it that they're made to feel unwelcomed? So when we talk about psychological safety, we can think the same way. Is the workplace the problem, or is the person the problem? A lot of times when we see recruitment and retention challenges, we blame it on the person. They left because they couldn't handle it. They left because they didn't like the job. They left because they didn't get along with the people, or they weren't a good fit for our company. They didn't have the skills we wanted. And we blame the individual instead of flexing to understand that maybe it's the space that we're creating. So when we talk about recruitment, we're looking at two things. We're looking at talent avoidance and we're looking at missed opportunities. So when candidates are looking at company cultures, they may avoid companies with poor reputations. And that can come from word of mouth if you're in a smaller organization or a small community. And that could also be a larger presence of what the organization is like if it's a chain or if it has a larger corporation that's overarching. So people will understand that there's something that's not right about that space. And I'm sure we've all had the opportunity to hear about a place or a group of people or an organization where you just know it's not right there. And because we have people putting themselves first, you are going to maybe avoid applying or avoid moving into that space. And this goes beyond your organization. This is your community as well, because people come with a network. They don't just come to a community and go to their job and go home and unplug. When I was teaching for years, I think that's what students think, that teachers just unplug at the end of the night. But you're looking at that network of people. Who do they go to the grocery store? Do they go shopping? What do they do for fun? Are they in school? Do they have children in school? Do they coach? Do they have hobbies? All of that avoidance comes from the way that culture is presented. So are they coming into a culture, or is there a culture present that makes them feel like they can be welcomed, included, and valued? And missed opportunities are fear-driven environments that reduce innovation and deter diverse perspectives. So when you have that lack of psychological safety, you're reducing the opportunity to have people come in. And a lot of that comes in with the culture fit versus culture flex perspective. When you have an organization that's looking for a culture fit, then you're looking to put someone into what you already have existing. And that can push people away because they feel already that they're going to have to give up some of themselves to fit into your organization versus seeing an organization that's willing to listen to them, hear what they have to say, and potentially shift because they're bringing new ideas in. We're hiring people and we're bringing people on because we want their skills and we also want the experiences that they have. If we're not willing to hear about those experiences from another organization or from their schooling or their personal life, then we're losing the value that they have by forcing them to be a culture fit. When we look at retention, there's two pieces: turnover rates and morale and productivity. So when we talk about retention, we're looking at what we're doing to create an organization where people want to be. A lot of conversation I've had recently, people say, how do you make people go above and beyond? And it reminds me of the K to 12 education system where a provincial standard is 70%. And so you want to get an 80, 90, 100, you have to go above and beyond the expectations. And I think that that's very challenging, especially in schooling or in the workplace, when we create this idea of going above and beyond at the the compensation rate that you're given. When you ask people to go above and beyond, it is that personal connection, that investment into an organization. And you can only do that when they see that their contributions are going to benefit them back. And that's through psychological safety. They can't contribute if they don't see themselves in the future because they don't see themselves investing in themselves. Why would they invest in someone else? So you have to create that space for them to invest in themselves. So, fearful employees are 3 times more likely to leave their job within a year. And for morale and productivity, teams with low psychological safety report a 27% drop in productivity and a 15% drop in team cohesion. So, you're seeing those numbers represent the way that people interact. We know that the costs of losing new talent within a year is very challenging for organizations, which means that people are often more picky in that recruitment process. But it's hand in hand with recruitment and retention because you want to bring people in, but you want to bring them into a space that they're willing to stay. And when we look at that third piece, financial, we're looking at those recruitment costs, which right now, if you look at SHRM's most recent data, they're saying that turnover can cost up to 200% of an employee's salary. I just completed a project with an organization in manufacturing who said that their HR department reported $25,000 to rehire someone in that position. And so it may not be your 200% for your organization, but $25,000 to reinvest within a year or a couple of years is a huge piece of what you could be doing within that organization. The ratio is 4 to 1. So for every dollar that you invest in mental well-being support for your employees, you're going to get a $4 quote return on that investment. So investing in psychological safety, well-being, and how people are supported is really impactful to that overall success of your organization. And then we see those numbers about low productivity and then the team cohesion. And we know that numbers increasing costs, a lot of those are maybe intangible because of the way people interact. But when there's distrust and fear, people aren't engaging effectively, you're going to have increased errors. You're going to have a decreased attention to risk. And so those things I'm talking about where we may not address it, a slip and fall, an injury because someone made a mistake when they were doing something on the job, or you have an error in filing that they have to go back and do that filing again. We see some of these as maybe performance issues, but we don't consider that they could be psychological safety issues as well. Because if someone doesn't feel comfortable in their organization, they may not be performing as effectively. And so those numbers start to spread out in terms of how we interact. So let's look at the ripple effect of this and talk about how psychological safety really is in everything that we do. When we talk about psychological safety, we're talking about someone's well-being. We're looking at how they think about themselves, how they think about others, how they understand where they're situated in the trajectory of their future, of the network of people around them. It's their mental health, it's the way they communicate, the trust they have, the relationships they build. And that in turn results in how they represent your organization, but also how they act and feel within your organization. So when this ripples out, we're looking at a few things. First, we start at the individual. So the individual is going to have that reduced productivity that we talked about. They may have more errors. They may be reluctant to share. They could have less creativity. The morale is down. They're not engaging. And they're really starting to pull back. A lot of times that immediate pullback, we don't draw attention to the fact that it could be someone or something impacting them. We believe that it's the individual not putting in enough effort. They've got too much on their plate. They're not working hard enough. They're not trying hard enough. They don't understand basic instructions. All of these things could affect the way that they're performing, and we may blame them as an individual. They also may become more hesitant to contribute. So then we can misjudge them on their contribution or willingness to lead projects or be involved, their stagnant effort in progressing their career or themselves. Now, that carries out into the way that they interact with their colleagues. In the way that we interact, whether they're in a position of power or they're supervising others or they're influencing others, a workplace is always interconnected. So if you work by yourself in an office or you work on a whole team, you still have that ability to contribute to the way that people perceive the situation. So they could have strained relationships. There's a lack of trust, and we know when there's a lack of trust that there's not going to be communication or critical feedback that we may need. People are going to be more hesitant to address problems or conflicts. They may not want to share information. You may have more disruptions because people are leaving departments or leaving the workplace. And so you have that negative perspective that's going to perpetuate in your organization, or maybe within a smaller component of your organization. And ultimately that leads to lesser effective decision making, problem solving, innovation, scaling, everything that associates with the well being of your roles and responsibilities. That then can carry out to your clients or who you're serving. So you'd have lower quality of service because there may be more errors or inconsistencies. The communication is going to be more difficult outward, because if you have someone who's working with one person in your organization and they also need information from another, but then those two colleagues aren't communicating effectively, you can have those challenges ripple out. It could weaken the rapport with your clients. You have loss of trust, and that affects short and long-term relationships. So now this feeling within your organization is going to radiate outward. It can also affect your leadership. And when I say leadership, I mean everyone is in positions of power within an organization because we can all influence other people. Everything we do to communicate influences someone else. But when you have a feeling of people who are providing leadership to others, they can be affected by this lack of psychological safety, because now you have limited or poor decision making, delayed decisions. You might be risk averse because now you're concerned with the increased risks that you're having within your organization. It could have difficulty with top talent. You can have disengagement or that dissatisfaction. So you're pulling away from what you should be doing in a position of power where you're guiding and setting a vision. And now you're starting to deal with all of these day-to-day mundane tasks of, are my employees talking to each other? Do people feel like they should buy into our organization? And so that can affect the way that your leadership is taking on their roles, because now they've taken on other roles to maintain a healthy environment. And outward further into your network, whether it's your suppliers or it's your talent agencies or your other organizations that are interconnected, you can now have decreased effectiveness with them. That poor communication transfers out, that loss of trust. You might have inconsistent delivery or interactions. You might have unreliable relationships, poor reputation, more hesitancy. And so what you're seeing is your organization, from one person feeling unsafe, can carry out into the way that they interact with others, the way that your clients interact with you, the way that your leadership runs, and the way that your larger network is facing its daily tasks. So psychological safety is not just that individual's well-being or whether they can come into work and be seen, heard, and valued. It's every component of an organization. So what do you do to create a psychologically safe space? So there's 4 A's for a psychologically safe space. What you can do as an innovator is you can maintain accountability, create action, develop autonomy, and support alignment. So what you're doing is, when you create accountability, you're training leaders on inclusive communication, you're building emotional intelligence and conflict resolution. What you're doing is you're targeting what psychological safety is built around, whether you have the way people are communicating needs to be responsive to psychological safety. Emotional intelligence builds people's understanding of what psychological safety is and how they can contribute to it. And then conflict resolution, how you're responding to issues that could be related to or impact psychological safety. You have the opportunity to encourage openness to feedback. When we look at building trust or understanding why people are not providing feedback or creating intentional pathways to feedback, that's really important to consider. We can say our door is always open, but how do we know our door is open? If people aren't coming through it, it's likely that it's physically open, but you don't have the culture for people to share. And then proving actions with transparency. So when you're holding people accountable, you're providing them resources, and then you're holding them accountable to implementing those resources. So you're saying, I'm asking for your feedback. Let's hear your feedback. So it's not just as, here's the opportunity, it's how are we putting that into place? When we're talking about action, we're looking at creating transparent processes for addressing concerns, rewarding behaviors that promote collaboration and respect, and creating alternative reporting and proactive responses. So you're putting things in action. A lot of times we create these ideas, or we may be mulling over ideas within our leadership teams, and we may not be expressing it outward. And so, really including people within that allows them to see you are being accountable. This is what we're doing. Here's how we're doing it. Building autonomy. So, we're talking about regular pulse checks, ensuring that people have the opportunity to be seen, heard, and valued. Essentially, when you're proving psychological safety, you want to say, hey, I see you. I want you to contribute. Here, like, you're going to, I'd like to hear what you have to say. And then by taking action, you're valuing what they said. And you don't have to take action positively on everything. Some things can be turned down, but hearing them and explaining to them why this works or this doesn't work gives them that full circle of psychological safety. And providing mentorship and professional development opportunities for people to develop themselves and develop the way that they engage with others. And lastly, there we have the way that we are aligned. So, highlighting psychological safety in branding and training, making sure that your organization knows this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, this is the impact of if we do it and if we don't do it, and getting that buy in from people. And really pushing that, because if you say, we're psychologically safe, we support psychological safety, but then you let things fall through the cracks, it's going to show people who really need to see that their psychological safety at the front of mind. It's going to show them that the care isn't there. Onboarding new hires with clear expectations and making sure that those practices are maintained regularly, and then being consistent, because it's very easy to get a fresh breath of air where we have a lot of energy and ability to push forward, and then we may not have the opportunity to do that in 2 months from now. So looking at the future to see how are we being consistent with the work that we're doing. You don't have to do everything overnight, but when you create a plan, when you're putting things into action, you're transparent about it, you have that opportunity to show people they're understood. We want to hear from you. We value what you say. You are a part of this organization. That gives them that investment to contribute going forward. Before we wrap up today, I want to give you something to think about. I want you to ask yourself, how do you know that your workplace has a culture of trust and safety? A lot of times, especially in positions that are in HR or in leadership, we may be kind of outside of that typical day-to-day culture. And so how are you understanding whether what you're pushing forward, what this message is being integrated? So how do you know that your workplace has a culture of trust and safety? What are the ways that you're measuring that? What are the ways you're getting feedback on that? What are the metrics that you're saying, this is how I know, and this is where we're improving, and then what ways you're improving on that? Because if we can't measure it, whether it's tangible or intangible, if we're not measuring it, then we don't know if we're improving. And if we don't know how we're measuring it, then how can we say we're doing it at all? Thank you very much for taking the time to learn with me this afternoon. I appreciate you taking the opportunity to develop your organization, develop your ability to integrate more psychological safety into your spaces. And I welcome any questions in the Q&A component. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.